Darren, if you walk out my house, you cannot wear a hooded sweatshirt. Because if you wear a hooded sweatshirt and you are walking in the wrong place, you fit the description. There are no hooded sweatshirts allowed in my house. It was a rule. Darren, we do not speak slang in our household. Because if you speak slang, people are automatically going to interpret that that is how you speak all the time and not just something you enjoy to do. Where on the other side, where I had friends who were white, they can use bro all the time and nobody's like, do they really know that everybody's not their brother? Like, I'm wondering if like there's an intellectual thing going on. They keep calling everybody bro, and it would never be questioned. But another interesting part of my diversity story is my diversity story started later in life for me. Why? Because I grew up international. I was an Army brat. When I was 2 years old, I moved to Germany. And then after Germany, I moved to Washington State. So I went from being in an international context where race was not that big of a deal. Then I went to the Pacific Northwest where everything's a big deal, but it's never talked about. And then I came to the inner city of Philadelphia. And it was just like, whoa, what in the world is going on? I live in a neighborhood that everybody looks like me now, even though they're different than me. They look like me because my parents didn't want to go through the task of living amongst others who were different in a racially tense environment. So they say, no, you know what? No matter what, we're going to live around our own. And that was my mother in the first chapter, and my father and my family, my grandparents, saying the reason why I'm doing this for you is because I'm just trying to protect you. And what it bred in me is what I would call, and some people who've grown up in the context that I've grown up, and they would say, Darren, I think you're going a little too far with this. I would call this defensive racism. Now watch this. I'm going to help you understand the heart of an African American person. There are some African Americans out there that believe that black people cannot be racist because racism is a social construct that was organized by people to oppress us. So they won't even say that they're racist. They say, you know what, I might be a little prejudiced, but racist, that's a bit far. I can't be a racist because that's a created system. But what I learned was not diversity, but competing. So when I finally went to institutions that had white people in it, my mom would sit me down and she said, I want you to know that they're not like you. They might be your friend right now, but you are fighting for a spot in the same college, and they have privilege, and you have to be better. You can't just be just as good, you have to be better. And what my mom was trying to do was protect me. But then we get into the first person that I had of an opposite race that actually positively influenced me was my 11th grade law and government teacher, Judy Paul. And the reason why she influenced me is because she taught dignity. And what do I mean by that? Judy Paul did not give me dignity. God gave me dignity. But the way that Judy Paul taught me, she reinforced that that dignity was inside of me. It was a high school that I went to, West Philadelphia High School. Now, mind you, Army brat, moved a lot, went to 3 different high schools in 4 years, right? And so I'm at West Philadelphia High School, where I'm graduating from. It's a majority African-American high school. And when I started going to this high school, it was the beginning of when you walked into inner city high school as a student, you had to walk through a metal detector. So every morning I'm walking in school and I'm getting patted down and searched. And then after that, when I walk in, I see actual police officers in my building. My school had a probation office in it. And so you're telling me that I can be anything that I dream of. You're telling me that I have all this value, but basically my school is set up like a prison. And I would go to Judy Paul's class, and I was in the midst of, do I go into my natural personality of who I really want to be, and we'll talk about that in my next chapter, or do I go and do the things where I find community at? And so I was in between two places. Do I pursue going to college and doing the right thing, or do I hang out with the guys on the corner that I have community in? And I would go to Judy Paul's class, and Judy Paul would say, Darren, you know what? I think you're going to be a fantastic lawyer, because that was my thing, law school. Sometimes I still think about leaving my church and just going to law school. Like, hey guys, change your plans. She said, man, I think you would be a fantastic lawyer. And she just didn't give me a general compliment. She said, this is why. Because I noticed this about you and that about you. And when you did this and when you did that, she taught in a way that aroused and affirmed my dignity. And that was the first person. Now, mind you, I'm in the 11th grade, guys. And this is the first person, and some of your stories might even be later. College was the first person, or when I got my first job was the first person. So Judy Paul was a big part of teaching me dignity. Now, the third question that we have here was when I really start digging into the depth of my story. Covering. Are there any aspects of your racial identity you felt like you had to cover? So for some reason, I grew up in all these anomalies of black culture. I tell people to this day, in Philadelphia, I grew up in basically a white evangelical church that was black. Right? It was just like they had an orchestra for a choir, and like they would just do all kinds of stuff. And then when I got to a white evangelical church, I'm like, man, this feels like home. Like this is where what I'm used to. And so I grew up in a church that many people don't get this opportunity, and I didn't know that, of affluent African Americans. There was socioeconomic diversity, but for the most part, it was a middle to upper middle to wealthy church of black people, right? And so when I came into doing ministry, or I went into my career field, once I finished school, I noticed that God ended up putting me in in cultural context and settings that I was the minority around majority white audiences, or around majority white workforce. And so the way that I covered was not because I was trying to hide something, but it was a question where I wonder if I can be fully black here. Because what I was taught and what I lived and what was a reality, being fully black some places will make you lose your job. Being fully black sometimes is a way that it will stop you from climbing the ladder, even though you do the great work. If you don't assimilate, that's a knock against your record. And so I had to ask myself the question, and I'm still working through some of this covering. When I walk into environments and I'm the minority, am I going to be authentic, or am I going to assimilate? I want to let you know something. There is a term for this that is used by a famous sociologist by the name of W.E.B. Du Bois, and he talks about what we call double consciousness. And this is how black people have to live, African Americans, minorities. We live with a double consciousness. What is double consciousness? It is a peculiar sensation, is double consciousness. This sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, or measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in an amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness. An American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. Now, this was written a long time ago, so this language would be different nowadays. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world and Africa. He would not bleach his Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. Watch this, here it is. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and American. That's his wish. That I can be fully black and be fully American and be fully accepted. Can I tell you I'm still working on this covering? Let me tell you something. I met with Pastor Scott and Trevor yesterday, and whether it was before ministry or often I would have to travel for work, or if I was going anywhere that was a professional setting, I would never wear sweatpants. I'm catching a 5 o'clock flight. I know I'm going to be flying all day in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. I will look professional, because in my thought, in my mind, in some places where the way the world works is you get better service and you get better recognition when you look like you are about something rather than looking comfortable like everybody else. Everybody else got on sweatpants at the airport. It's just time. I'm just getting to the point where I can put on sweatpants and be authentic when I'm flying in the airport. Why? Because I'm just getting to the point where it's just like, I want to be authentic instead of assimilating and fitting in to what a culture, what somebody wants me to be. I just want to be myself. And so I'm still working on covering. What's the next thing? It says, where is God pushing you? And our fourth question that I had to answer is, what is a turning point for you? A turning point for me and my diversity story is deconstructing my own narrative. If you are working on your diversity story, I do not think your turning point is going to be something you do. Your turning point is going to be something that is happening internally inside of you that is changing your point of view. Here's my turning point. That I realize in my story, in the way that I see race, the way that I see culture, that if I'm looking at it from God's perspective, I'm just as bad as those who are in opposition to me. Not better. I may have got dealt a bad hand, but when I go into an Asian store in my community, when I live in my community that is gentrifying right now, the community that our church in that is gentrifying, my thoughts are just as bad as those who may seem like my enemy. And I don't get permission to have that. So in order for me to reach this turning point, there are some things in my heart that I have to give to God to change. I told Pastor Scott and Trevor last night, I'm going to be more vulnerable with you than I've ever been with anybody in this conversation. Here are two of my turning points. Here are two of the things that I've been challenged by the most in my life. Interracial marriage and interracial adoption. Why interracial marriage? Because there seems to be this issue that we have in the African American community where sometimes we look at interracial marriage. When somebody marries outside of our race, it makes us feel like they're saying the people inside of our race aren't good enough. Why would you go marry a such and such of this kind of woman? What, black women ain't good enough? Why would you do this? And this is a struggle that I'm just now beginning to work through. When you get to your turning point, watch this. You don't get to a turning point about reading or talking about diversity. You get to a turning point about living in diversity. And the people that helped me get to the turning point right here, before I go there, it's interracial marriage, it's interracial adoption, and I'm going to go into those next stages. But then it's also being a bridge in between two cultures. Sometimes I just hate being a bridge. Like, it's just exhausting sometimes being a bridge. And on my trip here, I found out that I wasn't only a bridge in between the diversity of what people look like, I'm a bridge generationally because I'm not a social media guy. And so it's been about 3 years since I've been on Instagram, and I was looking at Instagram the other day, and I was sitting in front of my computer, and I was like, I don't know how to work this. like this is bad. But then early when I got the rental car this weekend, I haven't put a key in ignition in a long time. Everything's just pushed to start, and I put this key in this ignition, and I can't get the key out of the car. It's just not. And so I'm just stuck in the middle of these two cultures. But this is what I think about being a bridge. That being a bridge comes with a responsibility, and I think far more of us need to be bridges in the midst of this conversation. It comes with a responsibility, and it comes with a heaviness. The reason why I know my feelings are just as bad as those who I may see as the opposition is because if I got a chance to be the oppressor in my flesh, I would do it in a second. I've lived through oppression, but if I've had the chance to be the oppressor, I would take it in a minute. And matter of fact, sometimes I find myself asking God, when do I get a turn? When do I get a turn to have the privilege and not be concerned? And Paulo Freire, a Brazilian philosopher, says this about the oppressor and oppressor. He says, because it is a distortion of being more fully human, sooner or later being less human leads the oppressed to struggle against those who made them so. In order for this struggle to have meaning, the oppressed must not, in seeking to regain their humanity, which is a way to create it, become in turn oppressors of the oppressors, but rather restorers of the humanity of both. This then is the great humanistic and historical task of the oppressed, to liberate themselves and the oppressor as well. Now, this language was written a long time ago, so I'm not calling anybody oppressed or oppressor, but this is what I'm saying. When you're in the diversity conversation, your goal is not just to learn. It's not just to listen. That's a part of it. But your goal is to do, and for some of us who have been on the oppressed side of this conversation, our duty is to liberate both those who have been oppressed and the oppressor so we can come out with a new system. But sometimes in my heart, all I want is revenge. I don't know why Drake popped in my head right there. My mind just goes everywhere. It just goes everywhere. But revenge does not bring new outcomes. It just brings cycles. Let me close out with this. In order for me to get through my challenges, my dislike, at a point in my life, my hatred of interracial marriage and interracial adoption, I had to rub up against people who did it in a way that showed me I was getting wrong. And one person was, you see them on my right, to your left, Brenton and Amanda Smith in Chicago, pastored alongside of Brenton and his family, and they adopted 2 black kids. And when I saw this at first, I was just like, oh my God, what in the world are Brenton and Amanda doing? But what they did is they adopted them and they did not pull them out of their culture. They adopted them and they let them have a connection with the other side of their family. They adopted them and they just did things well. And so the challenge that I had sitting deep inside of my stomach was, why would you adopt a kid that is different but then make him like you? Why would you do that? And Brenton and them told me, they sat me down and I talked to Brenton about this, and he says, Darren, you don't know what people don't know. And instead of being opposed and being so far away from them, there are some things that they are going to do better than you, and there's some things that you're going to do better for them. You got to get close so you can rub off on one another. And then the other one are Tamika and Landon, who are another interracial couple who is at our church right now, and together they have 9 kids, right? Like he has 5, she has 4, right? And it has become a joy for me to see them interact. And I've sat down and I've told them, tell people your story. Landon, Tamika, you have helped grow a part of me that God has been trying to grow for a long time. And the way that you've done it is you didn't teach me a Bible story, you didn't sit down and preach to me. You were just your comfortable selves. You did what God called you to do. You love one another, and I've learned from that. And I've wrestled with that, and I've fought with that. And then chapter 6 is just a question for you. Is that I believe that diversity is God intended, not human dependent. And so I believe all of you can walk out of here right now, which I know you won't, but I'm saying that you could walk out of here and you could say to yourself, I don't want anything to do with this. Doesn't mean God's not going to do it. He might not use you, but he'll use others around you. And so if diversity is God intended and not human dependent, that means that God has a goal. And that when you are sitting here, you are now a part of God's goal. You have opened yourself up to this. And now you have to go out and ask yourself, if you are going to make Iowa City, the areas around it, a place of hope where diversity can flourish, or a place of silent hate. Hatred doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes I think we give different things, different words. And one of the things that feels like hatred to me might not feel like hatred to you is indifference. When people just sit, don't say nothing, don't do nothing. They got an opinion about what they like or what they don't like. They know something's wrong, but they won't speak up for the right. And so we have a job. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, do we want to make Iowa City, these places of hope, where diversity is learned, where diversity is worked out, where diversity can be messy. It's messy, y'all. It's intrusive. Diversity is not knocking on your door asking, can it come in, can it come in? It's just going to burst on the scene one day, and you're like, what in the world do I do with this? So, can I be honest with you? When Landon and Tamika showed up, I'm like, God, what in the world do I do with the interracial couple that I actually really love? Like, they are just changing my mind about things. Like, this is like crazy to me. And God begins to show me and lead me. So I hope my diversity story helps with you with yours. Be transparent, be vulnerable. You're not perfect. I got some nasty stuff in my heart that God's been working out over 5, 6, 7, 9, 10 years. It didn't get there in one day. It's not going to leave in one day. But one thing that I do is I call it wrong, and I say, God, I need to work through this. And the things that are right in my diversity story, I call them right, and I say it's because of the glory of God. So I hope that your diversity story can be shared amongst those that you are in life with. And thank you for allowing me to share mine.